Hi, year 10. For this lesson, you're just going to need your exercise, a pen and a ruler. Let's start with some retrieval practice for the do now. Firstly, who was Bevan? Secondly, who opposed the NHS and why? And finally, why was the NHS introduced? So give yourself 5-10 minutes or so to answer those. Can you please pause the video now? Answers for the do now then. So firstly, Aneurin Bevan was the Labour Health Minister who introduced the NHS in 1948. Question 2, doctors opposed the NHS because they felt it would impact their working hours and pay. Councils and charities didn't want the government taking control of their hospitals, and some people believed people were poor because they were lazy and should not be helped. And question 3, the NHS was introduced due to the Beveridge Report. This report recommended the best way to improve life for the people of Britain after World War II was to introduce a free national health service. Title for today then, ladies and gents, Spring Term Tri-Weekly 1, and we're going to be having a look at a question 1 today. We will have a look at a question 4 at a later date. I know we haven't got there yet. Ideally, I'd like to do it in person so we can go through it and you can have some immediate feedback on what we're doing. If that's not possible in the short term, then I will get on making you a lesson about question 4. But for now, we're going to have another look at a question 1 and focusing on the NHS. Before you get on to your tri-weekly, I thought we'd go through a question 1 as an example, so you are familiar with it and you remember how to answer this type of question. So we've got an example for you here. How useful is this source to a historian studying how traditional ideas were influenced during the Renaissance? 8 marks. And so you can see the source here. Got a lovely engraving. It's the front page of a book, and if we have a look at the provenance, it tells us the title page of Vesalius's book, The Fabric of the Human Body. This was published in 1543 and contained a detailed and fully illustrated description of human anatomy. So this is, the example question, and we're going to go through it step by step. What should you do before you have a go at writing your own answer to a different question? So it's important that the first step that you do is read the question fully and highlight or underline the key parts of it. This is going to help you stay focused on what sort of things you need to be saying, making sure that you're linking back and using the language of the question. So you need to make sure that you are using the word useful, and you need to be thinking about using the words traditional ideas, maybe influenced as well. You can use synonyms for that. And we need to make sure Renaissance is included as well. So if we're during the Renaissance, it's traditional ideas. Well, traditional ideas therefore mean medieval period, right? Older ideas, or older than that, maybe even our ancient doctors like Galen and Hippocrates. So already we've got a context. It's the Renaissance period, and we're looking at, ideas, traditional ideas, so old ideas that exist. So once we've done that, we know the basis of the question, what it is that we're focusing on. We need to annotate the source. And so to do this, you need to identify key parts of the source in relation to the question. You can see here that I have identified 3 important parts of this source. Firstly, we've got students crowding around the body so they can see what Vesalius is doing, rather than simply listening to Galen being read aloud. Because remember, that's the traditional way of doing it during the medieval period. Surgeons particularly learnt, and doctors as well, through Galen being read aloud to them whilst things are happening. So we've got a change here. We've got observation. We've got Vesalius in the centre, dissecting the body himself. As you're going to think, well, if he's in the middle, clearly he's the most important thing. That's the most important thing. So maybe, his ideas and, you personally getting involved is the backbone of this book. We could suggest that by him being in the middle, dissecting a body. And I know it's difficult because how grey and I said engraving, so it's quite difficult to see sometimes, especially with it being 500 years old. But at the front we've got Galen, and he's wearing a toga. You can see another guy wearing a toga at the front as well, so you can see through the difference in their clothes that these are older people, and so we can assume it's Galen. It kind of looks like him. So Galen and other Greek doctors are shown at the same level as Vesalius, not higher up as if they were superior. So if we've got our ancient doctors at the same level, well, that means the knowledge is the same, and so we shouldn't revere these ancient doctors for what they did. We should learn from them. They're equals. We all work in the medical profession together. So those are the sorts of things that we can work out just from the front cover of this book and some of the knowledge that we have about the Renaissance period, about the medieval period, and about Vesalius himself. The third step is to read through the provenance and to pick out any key information. I would always recommend reading the provenance at the very beginning. Sometimes it tells you information that's important as well. If there's difficult things in the source, it might tell you in the provenance what you're looking at. So if I'm looking at the provenance, I've highlighted Vesalius, the fabric of the human body, its published date in 1543, and fully an illustrated description of human anatomy. So those are the things which I think are important. Those are the things that I've picked out. And then the final bit, before we start writing, is to put in any extra knowledge that might give you some context. So I've put here, before Vesalius, professors sat and read aloud whilst demonstrators did the dissection. And Vesalius believed that it was vital to ask questions and challenge traditional ideas by carrying out dissections. The title page of his book, The Fabric of the Human Body, tells us a lot about his attitudes towards anatomy and teaching medical students. So that's a bit of context that we've got as well. Once you've gone through the kind of setting up of it, we need to then acknowledge structure. How is it that you construct an answer to this question in the most effective way? And to do that, you need to do three different things. Firstly, an introductory statement, and paragraph 1 about the content, and then paragraph 2 about the provenance. If you don't do the content and provenance, you can't get a high mark, you can't get to a level 4, you have to acknowledge both. To get a level 3, you only need to do the content or the provenance, but for that, context is really important, and you'll see how much context, how much extra evidence I put in the example answer later. So start with our introductory statement, and you give a measurement of usefulness and acknowledges the limitations. So I would suggest you start off with something like, the source is very useful to historians studying whatever it is in the question, but it has its limitations. This way you're acknowledging that the source isn't perfect, but you don't get any marks for going into the negatives. It's all about what it is useful for. So all you need to do is just acknowledge limitations at the beginning, and that is enough. That's it, it's done. So we look at paragraph 1 then, and paragraph 1 focuses on the content of the source, what you can actually see in the source. And so, got the 4 steps that you need to go through and some suggested ways that you can start those sentences. You don't have to use this, but the structure is the way in which you need to do it. So firstly, you have to describe what you can see in the source. You don't have to do the entire source, but you do certainly have to pick out one thing that you are focusing on and describe that. So what is it? Where is it? What does it show you? That sort of thing. After that, you make an inference linked to the question. So you need to go, what does that suggest? Now you've seen this picture, what does that tell us? So if we go back to, we've got all these people watching rather than listening to Galen. Well, this suggests that there's a change in the way in which students are being taught medical knowledge. There's a lot more observation than just kind of listening and reading old books. So, there we've got an inference. Then we need to support the inference with your own knowledge. And this is key, right? You have to put in stuff that you know about the time or about the question. And so remember, this question is saying, how has it influenced traditional methods? Which means you need to have knowledge of what happened before as well as the changes which are being made. So there's got to be some mention of the old knowledge of the medieval period, the old knowledge of Galen, particularly as we can see him on the front cover. And then you link back to the question, why is this information useful? So those are the 4 steps that you go through. They don't, have to necessarily be always in that order, because sometimes the supporting and the linking can merge into one, depending on how confident you are with your writing. But on the next slide, I've got an example paragraph that I've written for you. So in the source, Galen and other Greek doctors are shown at the same level as Vesalius, not higher, which was the custom of the medieval period. This suggests that the work of ancient doctors should not be seen as more important than contemporary doctors. Vesalius firmly believed in the need to challenge traditional ideas through dissection so they could develop better understanding of the human body. Vesalius also changed the way in which students learnt by having them watch dissections closely rather than listening to Galen being read aloud. This information is useful because it shows how medical knowledge is being challenged and improved using more practical methods and the latest medical developments. This was revolutionary at the time because during the medieval period the church controlled medical knowledge, as Galen's views supported their own theories. Any challenge to Galen's theories was seen as a challenge to the church, and men like Roger Bacon were imprisoned for suggesting that doctors should trust instinct rather than ancient texts. Therefore, we can see the Renaissance has had a large influence on traditional ideas. Moving on to paragraph 2 then. So paragraph 2 focuses on the provenance of the source. This is the piece of writing that comes with the source and gives you extra useful details. And as I mentioned earlier, often the provenance will tell you difficult things in the source. So please make sure you read it properly. So again, I've got suggested steps for you to go through. These are what I would suggest that you go with. They're the best way to do it, and sentence starters that you could use. They're just there to help you. So firstly, pick up a detail from the provenance. I think the best ones to go for are either who created it, because then we know what it is that they are trying to do themselves. So if we're thinking about, this is Vesalius, he's trying to influence medical knowledge and change the way in which people are being taught and the practices that they go through. So if it's his book, then we very much know it's about his message and what he's trying to do. So, we have very much the purpose involved there. Sometimes you might be better off going with what it is. And so, for in this example, we've got a book. Well, if it's a book, well, what does that tell us? And it's about communication of knowledge, and we think about, yes, the printing press is new. So, you can go on from that way. So I would say that, the best ones to go for are either who is it that's created it or what actually is it. Because, you might get posters, you might get cartoons, for all of these things, what they are changes the way in which you need to use that information. So pick a detail, then you need to make an inference from that. So, either what it is or who is it, what does that then tell us about what they're trying to do, what they're trying to achieve. Support this inference with your own knowledge. Again, really important, you've got to give context. So, what do you know about Vesalius? Or, with the question, what do you know about the time? What do you know about motives? What do you know about understanding at the time? Things like that. And understanding at the time is probably the best bit of best bit of context you can add to your answer. Then link back to the question, explaining why this information is useful. So again, got to make sure you're using the keyword useful to explain at the end and link it back to that question. So again, on the next slide, I've got an example for you, an example paragraph 2. So the source is a book created by Vesalius to teach about human anatomy during the early Renaissance. As Vesalius created it himself and drew the illustrations inside, it shows us the message that Vesalius was trying to share about human anatomy. With the invention of the printing press in 1436, books were far easier to mass produce and ideas could be communicated far more efficiently. The source, therefore, gives us an excellent insight into the key messages that Vesalius wanted to get across about approaches to anatomy, training and dissection, as well as an understanding of how traditional medical knowledge was being challenged and developed. So what do I need to see from you for your tri-weekly? So firstly, you need to write out the question and underline or highlight the key parts to focus on. You also need to write out the provenance and underline or highlight the key parts to focus on. If you can print it off, obviously you can print it off and highlight it that way, but if not, please do write them out. I'd like you to bullet point some key contextual knowledge that you could use in your answer. Think about, maybe at most 4 different things, because you're not going to have time to use anything more than that, really. I also need to see a fully answered question, so I need an introductory sentence, paragraph 1 on the content, and paragraph 2 on the provenance. And also what I'd like you to do is put a mark on your answer of where you got up to after 10 minutes, because you'll only have 10 minutes to write your answer in the actual exam. So here's your tri-weekly. You can spend 5-10 minutes or so planning, but it's really important that you only give yourself 20 minutes to write. Okay, that is the maximum amount of time you are allowed, because in the actual exam you will have 10 minutes, and so that's why I've asked you to mark where you get up to for 10 minutes. So 5 minutes or so to plan, maximum 20 minutes to write it. An answer to this question: how useful is source 1 to a historian studying reactions to Bevan's plans to establish an NHS? The provenance being a cartoon published in Punch, a satirical magazine in 1948. The figure on the left is Bevan. The words on the bowl say National Health Service. The doctors on the right are saying it all tastes awful. So no more than 20 minutes to write that, with a bit of time to plan. If you have any questions, please do email me. Otherwise, make sure your work goes up onto ClassChart so I can have a look and mark it. Thanks for listening.